Hello, this is Philip Kinsella, and you're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, the UK's biggest paranormal network, and this is Paranormal Dimensions with David Young.
And thank you for that intro, Philip. Right, okay, got another lovely guest for you we'll introduce in a moment. As you know, I've been doing calls out to people now, either by request or by my choosing. Right, today's call out is for Shane Hurd in Phoenix, Arizona, USA, Michelle Brooks, Sunshine Coast, Queensland, Australia, and Leroy C. Spooner, Hudson, Florida, USA. Hello, and I hope you'll all be listening, and I will be putting you on the page. Right, I've just got to put before I introduce my guest, I've just got to have a little mention about something. On one of my shows, the one with Frank Willis, I mistakenly said that the Bible was actually the Quran was actually older than the Bible. Now somebody pulled me up on this on the YouTube post for this particular show. So that was my own interpretation. I believed the Bible was not as old as the Quran. I was wrong, apparently. I did a little bit of research on that, and it seems that I think that the way I was thinking was probably like the King James Bible, thinking about the Islam being a lot older than that. I'm not a religious expert, so I don't really know, but that was my own opinion, and I apologise for that if anyone else was upset by it. It's just one of those things that I've learnt by, and I won't make that mistake again. I now know that the Bible is older than the Quran. Thank you. Right. Okay. Now the guest I've got today is going to be very interesting, I hope. And well, I know it's Simon Entwhistle. He's already got a show of his own on this network, and it's really about ghosts and hauntings. And I'm going to let him tell us all about that. And welcome, Simon Entwhistle.
Hello, Dave. Thank you very much for contacting me.
That's great. It's lovely to have you on the show, Simon.
My pleasure, I can assure you.
Yeah, I mean, I want to hear all about your show a bit later. I'll just sort of mention that Simon and I met very kind of briefly. At a conference a couple of years ago, Paraforce conference in Nottingham. And I was very impressed by Simon's presentation and ghost story. I think you told a couple of ghost stories, didn't you, on that particular day? And they were fantastic. The way you deliver them is fantastic. And I hope we'll get a few of those today on this particular show. Anyway, how did you get into this field, Simon?
Right. Well, many years ago, Dave, I joined the army. And I will never forget going to the recruiting office in 1975 and meeting the recruiting sergeant, and his words were, "Right, lad, you sign on the line here and you'll see the world." I had no idea that the very, very first week of my army service took me to a brilliant city called York in the north of England. And the city of York, of course, is a tourism paradise. They have 8 different guided ghost murder and mystery tours. One based on the Romans, one based on the Vikings, the Victorians, the really medieval ghosts, and then there's just general ghost walks. There's even one that takes place in the River Ouse, and I became hooked in 1979 when I left the army, and I decided to start my own tours. So it's really through tourism and the city of York that I got involved with ghost walks myself, David. Really,
fascinating. I've been doing a couple of those ghost walks myself, and they're brilliant. So now you do. I know you've done some around Salisbury Hall, haven't you? I've actually had dinner in that. It's quite an amazing place, isn't it? In North Lancashire, isn't it? That's right. Just outside of Blackburn.
It is indeed. It's a beautiful building.
Tudor building, yeah.
It's a gorgeous 1322 building with an extension in 1450. And just occasionally, David, they asked me to do guided ghost walks of the hall. I tend to do 4 a year, but there are some gorgeous, juicy stories. And I find in my experience as a ghost walker, it's nice to actually talk to local people and get their stories and then use those stories on the actual tour. And you can always tell when someone's being very honest and very truthful by the look in the face. You can always tell that they are being very honest, and a lot of these stories do come from the heart. And if you'd like, David, I'd like to start with a story from Salisbury.
Please do, yeah, please, yeah.
Right, okay, we're going to turn the clock back now to 2007. And I was asked to conduct a guided tour of the hall. And at the end of my guided spooky tour, a very, very pleasant lady came over to see me. And she opened a handbag and she said, "Simon, I've got a great story for you." She pulled from her handbag a photograph of herself taken in 1943 at Salisbury Hall. I've got to say, she told me she was 91 years old, and yet she looked more like a lady in her 60s, and she reminded me very, very much of the Hollywood or Pinewood actress Deborah Kerr. She really was a stunningly attractive woman, even in her 90s. So let's have her story, and it marries in beautifully with a story from the hall that took place in 1923. First of all, Salisbury Hall was in danger of being demolished through lack of funds, and the word tourism in 1923 hadn't really been invented. Local builders gathered like a flock of vultures to take away all the stone, all the timber from this gorgeous 1322 building. On the 11th hour, the Salisbury Hall Preservation Society got together, and they consisted mainly of entrepreneurs and historians, and they raised enough money to not only save the building, but to preserve it. And they couldn't let any Tom, Dick and Harry work in this medieval building. It had to be someone who was highly skilled in medieval buildings. One such person who fitted the bill, and wait for his name, Mr. Michael Palin. No relation to our Monty Python star whatsoever.
Oh, really? Oh, that's a coincidence, yeah.
Michael came from the little village of Darwin near Blackburn. He was an exceptionally good stonemason. He had worked on buildings like Bodelwyddan Castle in North Wales. He had worked on Levens Hall in Cumbria, Bram Hall in Cheshire, and he really knew his stuff when it came to working on Tudor buildings. He arrived on a beautiful June day, 1923, with his 4 apprentices, and he gave each apprentice a different part of the hall to work on. He chose the main hall, the oldest part of the building. He climbed up a ladder, and with a hammer and chisel, he chiseled away at the old and eroded stone from what we call the long gallery ceiling. He pushed a huge block of stone off, and as it fell towards the earth, standing beneath him was a little boy with curly black hair. And Palin shouted, "Look out, lad! Look out, lad!" The little boy just stood there. The stone came down, grazed his nose, and landed right in front of his toes. Palin came down that ladder at great speed to give this lad a piece of his mind, but the role was completely reversed. The little boy shouted, "You shouldn't be here! You shouldn't be here! You've got no right to be here!" "Well, I have got a right to be here," shouted Palin. "I've been employed to work in this building. Now you stand back. You could have been very badly injured." Palin turned round, climbed up the ladder, and the little boy had gone. That's strange. He must be a quick runner, he thought. For the next 5 months, they worked their socks off, bring in new timber, new tiles, and Salisbury Hall was beginning to look a bit like its Tudor self once again. They arrived for another hard day's graft on a bitterly cold December day, 1923. The blue skies disappeared and were replaced by clouds full of snow, and a wind whipped up. Heavy, heavy snow came down from the heavens, and Michael told his 4 apprentices, "I'm sorry, lads, there's no way we'll get back to Darwin tonight. We'll have to spend the night here." The 4 apprentices were really annoyed. They wanted to get back with their families. Christmas was approaching, but as they looked out of the window, the snow was coming down so thick that it was creeping up the window ledge. Michael said, "It'll be dark in exactly 1.5 hours. Let's go into the forest and get as much wood as we possibly can, and get a fire going all night. Well, the four lads complained bitterly, but they realised that outside the snow was falling down even thicker. They trudged out into the courtyard, made their way to the nearest forest, and brought back twigs and branches, and got the fire going in the main hall with at least a night's supply of firewood. In 1923, there was no mobile phones, no laptops, no TV, no radio, no Nintendo. So the only form of entertainment would be a good night's sleep. The four apprentices got their bedrolls and they rolled them out in front of the blazing fire in the main hall and fell into a deep sleep. Michael was an ardent Christian. He got his bedroll, sat on the bedroll, and had a few words with the good Lord upstairs. Halfway through his evening prayers, he glanced to the right and saw the chapel door, which was adjacent to the main hall, and a golden glowing light emanating from it. Out of the golden glowing light stepped this very, very beautiful young lady in Tudor dress, and she slowly walked towards Palin, straight through the sleeping apprentices, and knelt down in front of the fire and clasped her hands together, and Palin heard her utter the words, "I hope my husband survives the war." And then she disappeared, but disappeared with a crackle, a beautiful scent in the air. Palin's heart accelerated in his chest. His mouth went dry. He glanced to the right and nervously witnessed another golden glowing light emanating from the chapel doorway. Out of that golden glowing light stepped a 1642 Cavalier officer with bandoliers across his chest, sword by his side, a long goatee beard, and feathers in his cap. He made his way straight past Palin, through the sleeping apprentices, and put his hand on the chimney breast, and uttered the words, "I hope I survived the war." He too disappeared. By now Palin is becoming traumatized. He's witnessed something very, very, very paranormal. He gingerly, nervously turns his head to the right for the third time and sees a much smaller, glowing light make its way from the chapel doorway. Out of that little light stepped the little boy with the curly black hair that had nearly been hit by the stone in June of that year, and the little boy ran straight past Palin, through the sleeping apprentices, and out of the adjacent wall. As you can imagine, Michael Palin did not sleep very well that night, but quite surprisingly, when the four boys woke up, he never told them what had happened, and when he got back home to his wife and children, he never told them. He never told anyone. However, 20 years later, as a very elderly gentleman, he was making his way past Salisbury Hall, as he had done on many occasions, and noticed outside the building was a military vehicle belonging to the Royal Air Force. He thought, RAF, what are they doing there? He walked across the lawns, made his way into the main reception area, and saw two Royal Air Force personnel standing in front of that very fireplace. As the door clicked, they turned. Palin entered the room and made eye contact with the young lady in the RAF uniform. He just stood and stared at her. Quite naturally, she felt very, very embarrassed. "May I help you?" she said. Her companion, the officer, then intervened. "May we help you, please?" Palin recognised the young girl in the RAF uniform to be the same beautiful young lady he had seen walk out of that golden glowing light 23 years before, and he told her. She burst into tears. "Mr. Palin, I believe every word you've told me, but I'm from the city of Leicester. I've never been to Lancashire in my life before, but as we drove past in the staff car, I shouted, 'Stop, stop, stop! I know this place. I've been here before, and you, Mr. Palin, have opened my anxieties to this building. I met that lady some 5-6 years ago. She opened a handbag, and she showed me a photograph of herself standing by that very, very fireplace in 1943. As I said before, she was still a very attractive woman in her 90s, And you can always tell when someone is being very honest and very truthful. And that story came straight from her heart.
That's brilliant. So really, he came across three ghosts personally himself, by the sound of it, or was that more than that? I think I counted 3 there.
That's right, David. He counted 3, but it was amazing. I'd heard about the story, but when I met the lady, the RAF lady, it just confirmed Palin's story really did happen. And seeing this photo of this lady, and of course she told me how she'd met Palin in 1943, that day by the fireplace. It just married in beautifully with the story, if you will.
Yeah, it's a very interesting story. I mean, just go off that. What do you actually think ghosts are? Have you got any explanations or thoughts on that?
It's a fantastic question, that, David. I honestly can put my hand on my heart and tell you that I have never, ever seen a ghost.
Right.
But I've met people who have, and people who are of sound mind and body. And I suppose one of the main reasons that I do find the story of the paranormal interesting is that my father would never lie about anything. And his story is one of the finest stories I've ever heard. And there is a twist in the story as well, David. Would you like to hear that story?
Yes, please, Simon. Yeah, carry on.
It's one of my favourite.
This is your show. It's not mine today. This is.
Well, that's very kind of you, David. This story does come from the heart, and I swear to you, 100%, it is completely true. We're now going to turn the clock back now to 1960. I was 5 years old. My father bought this very, very beautiful old Victorian house in a little village outside the market town of Kendal called Hincaster. And we lived in the village of Worley near Clitheroe at the time. And I remember as a young boy of 5 seeing the Pickford's vehicle arrive, and my mother and father filling the Pickford's vehicle along with the Pickford staff.
It's nice that I actually know those areas, so it's kind of, I can actually picture them in my mind, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Go on.
It's okay, Dave. No problem whatsoever. So we set off and made our way towards South Lakeland. And I saw this house the first time. And in my case, David, it was love at first sight. It was a beautiful old limestone, 1898, 3-story house in its own grounds in this little village in South Lakeland. It was beautiful. And I would always remember that first day, because my mother and father were very, very concerned about myself, my brother, and indeed my sister. We were all under 10 years old. So mother and father made our beds up very, very quickly, and presumed by 8 o'clock that night we were fast asleep. However, my father was going to experience something very, very, very paranormal. Because it was a country house, the last job that needed to be done was to put up any curtains. But what they did do, they made the beds up, they took furniture upstairs, and they got cutlery out for meals, etc. The curtains could wait until tomorrow. So my father got into bed with my mother, and there was bright, bright moonlight emanating into the bedroom. And my father then heard the sounds of tiny footsteps coming up the staircase towards his bedroom. The door slowly opened, and in came a liver and white Cocker Spaniel. My father thought, oh, well, I must have left the door open downstairs. Where's that dog come from? So he got out of bed. Come on, let's have you. And he reached for the spaniel's collar. To his amazement, his hand went straight through the animal. He shrieked to himself and made a second attempt. His hand went through the animal again. The dog then turned to look at the bedroom window, almost as if its name was being called. And then it faded. It just disappeared. My mother, who had been in a deep sleep at the time, woke up with a jolt to find my father sitting at the end of the bed in a state of shock. And she said, oh, I've just had a very, very clear dream. A really clear dream. There's a man outside in Victorian clothing with a dog lead in his hand, pointing up at our bedroom window. My father then told my mum what he'd experienced. They never told me until I was about 15 years old, and I really grew to love that house. I knew it was very old, and but I had no experience myself, but I really grew to love the house. And I was really, really saddened in 1973 when my father sold the house, because with it went a lot of very, very happy childhood memories. However, this is where the story takes a most amazing twist. 3 years ago, my wife and I went on a Mediterranean cruise with P&O, and I've got to say, David, I really, really enjoyed it. On one of the evenings in the restaurants, some 3 tables away, I kept glancing up and I saw a rather attractive young lady that kept looking at me. And I thought, I really cannot be that good looking. She walked across with a big smile on her face and she said, "It's Simon, isn't it?" I said, "That's right." She said she came from the village of Chapman near Clitheroe. And of course, everyone in that part of the world knows each other. And I said, "Oh, yes, yes, of course." She said, "Simon, my job here on P&O, I'm the events manager. I book all the artists and all the events that take place on this gorgeous liner called the Oceana." She said, "I've been in your tours. Have you ever thought about doing a PowerPoint storytelling show for P&O on one of the cruise liners?" I said, "Well, I didn't really consider that, actually, Louise. I wouldn't have thought that would have gone down very well." She said, "Well, I'm going to give you an email address, and when you get back to England, contact P&O and go for an audition." So that's exactly what I did do. And I was told I could audition in Sussex or Cumbria. Now, of course, I live in Lancashire and Cumbria's around the corner. So I was told that Cumbria would be fine to meet what's called the cruise director, a lovely lady called Catherine. And Catherine gave me her email address and sat-nav code for my sat-nav navigation, and a date and a time to arrive. So I put the sat-nav code in my car and set off, and found myself driving over the beautiful Trough of Bowland, down into the city of Lancaster, and then up the M6 north, coming off at Heversham, a little village called Heversham, which I knew very well from my youth. And I thought, wow, my old house is not too far from here. I went through Heversham Head, which is a beautiful little road that takes you through a forest and down to the old driveway of my old house. The sat-nav said, "Turn left." And I found myself standing in front of that old house that I left in 1973 with all those thoughts and all those memories. And I thought, no, this is 14 million to 1 against, probably. I knocked on the door. I met Catherine, the cruise director. I said, "You look a bit sheepish, Simon." I said, "Well, I used to live here." I made my way into the front room, a room I'd not seen since I was a teenage boy. And memories of my grandparents and my parents came back, and friends had sat in that very room there. And I just couldn't perform. I just couldn't really talk about the cruises, etc., the audition. And Catherine actually understood this, and she made me a cup of tea. And I told her about my life as a young boy there. And then I told her about my father's ghostly encounter upstairs. As I told the story, the teacup in her hands fell to the floor and smashed. She said, "Simon, my brother lives in London. Every Christmas, he comes up to spend Christmas with me and my husband. And the very, very first Christmas he arrived here, he climbed into bed. The door of his bedroom opened, and in came a liver and white Cocker Spaniel." And I said, "Well, thank you, Dad. Thank you, Dad. That confirms to me that, yes, ghosts do exist. But no, I've never seen one myself, David. But I swear to you, that is a true story."
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, from that, it sounds like there are animal ghosts as well. I mean, we do hear of horses as well, don't we? I mean, does this mean there's an afterlife for animals, or do we all go to the same afterlife? I wonder. It's. I think it can be comforting to people that have lost animals and pets as well, because
Yes.
knowing that I mean, personally, I do believe that there's an afterlife for every living thing, really.
I'm sure there is, David. I would agree with that, actually, yes.
Yeah. I'd say it's only my own personal belief. I don't want to be trodden on for that, but
No, of course, yes.
I think it's really close to my heart. I mean, it's obviously why we're in the paranormal field as it is. I know people take the mickey out of us, and oh, you believe in ghosts or you believe in UFOs and things, but it's something that's very serious to us, isn't it? And
very much so. Dave, when we started our conversation, you mentioned the Holy Bible. When you look at the Holy Bible there, and you look at the resurrection of Jesus, I mean, the guy came back again.
Yeah.
Actually came back again. And, you've heard of doubting Thomas, St. Thomas, who had to put his hands on the body, and these stories weren't just invented, they actually happened. And I suppose really that gives us a lot of strength in knowing that there is a life after this one. At least I agree with that, Dave, anyway.
Yeah. I mean, and when you look at it, they are paranormal stories, aren't they?
Well, yes, yeah. I mean, to come back from the dead, but to actually prove it is fantastic, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, if you've just joined us, you're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and I'm speaking to Simon Entwhistle. Now, do you want to give us another story, Simon? We've had a couple of really good ones. If you've already missed them, so you have to catch it up on the podcast if you've just joined us. But please carry on, Simon.
I will indeed, Dave. And as I say, I work a lot with local tourism officers, in Lancashire, Yorkshire, and Cumbria, and they've been very helpful in terms of setting up tours for me. But one thing we always insisted on doing was not just reading about stories, but meeting local people. And this is one of my favourite stories. Some years ago, in the village of Darwin near Blackburn, I met a lovely chap called Bill Morris, and he was a smashing bloke, really, a real gentleman. And we went to the Witherspoons in Darwin, sat down and bought 2 pints of really excellent real ale. Sat down, and his eyes started to glaze over as he told me this story. He said he was born near the railway, the East Lancashire Railway, and his little garden went right down to the railway track where there was a fence there. And as a little boy of 4, 5, 6 and 7, he would sit on the fence and watch the trains come by and wave at the engine drivers. He told his mum and dad, when I leave school, I want to work on the railway. He left school at 14 and he got a job in the East Lancashire Railway as a wheel tapper. And his job was to work on the railway stations up the East Lancashire line, just tapping the wheels of the trains to make sure they weren't cracked. At the age of 18, he got a great job as a locomotive engine fireman. And just after his 21st birthday, he got the job of his dreams, a steam engine locomotive driver. And he worked from London Euston up to Glasgow, down to Glasgow, London Euston. But in the summer of 1951, he was transferred to the East Lancashire Railway. And he'd go past his mum and dad's house. And before he got to the house, he'd pull the whistle cord. And the train would go past the house. His mum and dad would come rushing out to wave at him this time. On a beautiful, beautiful August afternoon of that year, 1951, he took the train down from Carlisle, through the Ribble Valley and down towards Darwin. And just outside Darwin is a tunnel, a very, very long tunnel, called the Sough Tunnel. On either sides of the tunnel were flat open fields with fencing. And as Bill was about to take the engine into the tunnel, he glanced to the right, and there he saw a little boy with straw-coloured hair sitting on the fence, waving at the engine. Of course, Bill waved back and as the train went into the tunnel. He saw this little boy every single day for the next 4 weeks, and the straw-coloured haired boy was always sitting on the fence near the tunnel entrance. However, in late September of that year, he was coming down the line as usual, and he glanced to the right and saw the little boy was not on the fence this time, but actually in the centre of the field, surrounded by sleeping sheep. When the little boy looked up, he saw the engine and started to run towards the fencing, and Bill noted with great interest that the little boy was actually running through sleeping sheep. He elbowed the fireman, "Look at that, look at that!" But the train was in the tunnel. They got to Manchester, and they changed the freight over for the journey back up north. And the fireman said, "Bill, you've been very, very quiet. What's wrong, Bill?" "Well, you know that young lad, the lad we see on the fence, with straw-coloured hair, near the tunnel entrance? He was in a field today. He was running through sleeping sheep. The sheep didn't know he was there." "Oh, no, come on, Bill," said the fireman. "You're seeing things, mate." They set up back north again, and as they were about to enter the Soft Tunnel from the Manchester end, Bill noted in the distance a red glowing light. He slowed the engine down, and there he saw that the red light was being held by a police officer. "What's wrong, officer?" shouted Bill. "Ah, terrible, terrible," said the police sergeant. "Young lad's been killed at the entrance to the tunnel." "Oh, no, officer." "Yes, he lost his brother there 5 years ago." "Oh, officer, that's terrible, terrible." "It really is bad news. We've just been to see the parents. It wasn't a pleasant job, I can assure you." "No, it wouldn't be," said Bill. "It wouldn't be." A while later, permission was granted to take the engine through the tunnel. As Bill brought the steam locomotive out of the tunnel entrance into bright, bright sunshine, he glanced to the left and saw the straw-coloured haired boy holding the hand of a much taller boy. As Bill turned to look at them, they turned to look at him. They both raised their arms to wave, and they both vanished into thin air. Bill swallowed deeply. He elbowed the fireman. "Look at that, look at that!" "Sorry, mate, too busy shoveling," said the fireman. I will never forget as Bill finished his pipe that day. He said, "Simon, I never believed in ghosts until I saw one with my own eyes." A truly romantic story, but also a very beautiful story.
I've actually got a book in front of me, Professor Hans Holzer. Have you ever read any of his books? He's written some fantastic accounts of ghosts and such. I don't know if do you follow many ghost stories in literature?
I must say that's a new one to me, David. I must look that up, actually. I'm sure it's probably very interesting, actually, but I'm not familiar with the author, no.
No. Oh, okay. It's just called Ghosts: True Encounters with the World Beyond. It's quite a hefty book.
It sounds good. It sounds very good, actually, David. Yes.
Well, I actually came across the name Hans Holzer many years ago. Actually, he wrote a book about the ghost of Elvis Presley, actually, which was actually quite an interesting book. Whether it was true or not, it was about an encounter from beyond the grave, sort of thing, you know. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in there because I've got this book in front of me. Yes. But
I must look that up, David. Thank you very much.
That's all right. Hans Holzer. I presume he's probably German or something, but I'm not quite sure what his background is. So we're talking about ghosts with animals and humans, and the way they sort of react with us. A lot of the time they don't seem to actually notice that we're there, do they? I'm wondering if it's some sort of stone recordings or something of an old.
Very good question. Yeah, very good question. I must say you've hit on a great subject there, really. Many people believe in your theory there, David, regarding...
It's not my theory, but thank you.
Well, I think you're definitely on the right track, definitely. One story that does definitely seem to highlight that took place way back in 1953 in the Treasurer's House at York Minster. Working the Treasurer's House was a young boy called Harry Martindale. Harry was 18, he was an apprentice plumber, and his job was to install central heating. You can imagine working down the cellar by yourself. You've got a brick wall to your right, a brick wall to your left, and a ceiling above your head. He had a electric light down there. He had a blowtorch. He had copper piping. He had soldering irons, etc. And his job was to heat the pipes up, to bend them, to install them as central heating pipes. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and he's working down in the treasurer's house cellar when he heard the sound of a trumpet, almost like a... It got louder and louder, and as he glanced to his right, out of the bricked wall appeared a white horse with a Roman soldier sitting on it. The horse went straight past him, followed by platoon after platoon of Roman infantry. Harry was terrified. He scuttled down that ladder and cowered in fear in the corner of the cellar. As he looked up, he noticed that they couldn't see him. In fact, one of them walked straight through him. He had time to note what clothing they were wearing, but also he noted they all looked deeply, deeply depressed, really unhappy, very, very thin, very emaciated, but also slightly dark-skinned. They had, as he put, leather kilts on, round shields and spears. They didn't look at all like Hollywood Roman soldiers. He could only see them to their knees. As the last Roman soldier went past him, the sound of the trumpet disappeared as well. As you can imagine, this 18-year-old boy in the cellar was traumatised. He got to his feet, shaking with fear, and rushed out of the cellar at great speed. And he met his boss working above him. And he told the boss what had happened. And the boss said, "No, Harry, we've got to get this job finished. We are under contract. We have a deadline. I can't go down there again. Harry, you're sacked." Harry walked through York city centre that day, down Stone Gate, this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful street, and popped into the oldest inn in the city centre, called Ye Old Star Inn. He walked up to the bar there, and standing by the bar was a young lad enjoying a pint. And this young lad's expression in his face, he looked at young Harry and said, "Here, mate, you look like you've just seen a ghost." Actually, I've seen about 85 this afternoon. The York Evening Press journalist had a good laugh. Then he said, "I tell you what, mate, it's getting towards Halloween. I think I might just write your story. It sounds quite a good one, actually." So he wrote the story. And when the story was published, the whole city of York laughed at Harry Martindale. However, 2 weeks later, no one laughed at Harry. Some more work had to take place in the cellar. They had to remove a lot more soil. And at the area where Harry had seen his Roman soldiers, they found a beautiful Roman floor. And they found a beautiful stone tablet with the beautiful Roman numerals and the words Eberacum. They had found the very gateway to the garrison of York. And of course, 2,000 years ago, York was one of the biggest garrisons in the whole of England. And many historians then interviewed Harry about what he'd seen. And the way he described these Roman soldiers was a bit like something from a different world, a different time. And many people believe that what Harry saw that day was the Hispanic legion leaving the city of York for Carlisle, where they were wiped out by the Celts and the Scots. And your theory, Dave, is probably quite right. Somehow, Harry, with his blowtorch, his soldering iron, had somehow opened a time warp to a different era and a different time. He'd somehow captured it beautifully. It was a unique ghost sighting, a right time, right place, and probably the right chemicals he was using in the cellar.
The reason I said about that, because there was an interesting little presentation by Richard Felix on that.
Oh yes,
which was which I was very impressed with, because he went into the like Stones recording ghostly happenings in the past, and I found that really fascinating. It's just sort of given it a lot of thought since, and I think it's probably the case in a lot of cases. I won't say in every case, but in a lot of cases we're looking at a reenactment of the past, like a recording.
Yes. Yeah, a recording that was picked up. I mean, perhaps Harry's brain could have been a bit like a radio. Somebody's brain could have picked this up. But I know the Ninth Hispanic did leave York, and they were wiped out to a man. But the way he described them, were like emaciated, they were thin, they looked deeply depressed. Not a single smile on any of their faces. They looked deeply saddened. It was the way he described them, really.
It's that's a fascinating story. I mean, the thing is, I've heard stories also about the Roman soldiers, and they seem to be on a different level, as if the floor was lower down. Because
yes,
which I find rather strange. Which again backs up that thing about a recording, doesn't it, of the stone?
It does indeed, David. I think that theory is right, actually, David. Yes.
I wouldn't say it was that in every case. Obviously, I don't think it was the case with the dog and those ones that your father saw and things like that.
Amazing.
Because there was some sort of a reaction to the people themselves, wasn't there? They seem to know that they were there, but I'm sort of talking about ones that don't realise that you're there.
Yes.
It's hard to put it over. It's hard to. I mean, I've never seen a ghost myself that I know of, anyway. But I've seen UFOs, by the way. But I don't know if you believe in that sort of thing. But that's really sort of kind of where I come into this. But anyway, I'd love to hear another story, Simon. We've got sort of quite a bit. Probably got about a good 15 minutes to kill.
Yes.
Wrong word. Not to kill, but to pass.
Yeah, I'm with you. Let's have now an emotional story. And again, David, I do like to talk about people I've actually met, and this is a ghost story, but it's really, if I was to give the story a title, I think I'd call it The Letter. We're going to turn the clock back now to the early part of the last century, and a young boy called Jonathan Hesketh. Jonathan's only crime in life was to be born at the wrong time of the last century. He attended St Michael St John's Roman Catholic Primary School in Clitheroe. He had a good friend called Annie Cresswell. Now, these two really were good friends. It is so unusual for a 5-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl to feel love that they did do, and they were inseparable. They'd play with each other in the playground. They sat together at school, and there was a deep affection between both of them. By the time they were 16, they were inseparable, and they married each other just after their 18th birthdays at the Roman Catholic Church in Clitheroe. They had a lovely honeymoon on the beautiful Isle of Man. On coming back from the Isle of Man, John was horrified to see waiting for him a crisp white letter with the words HM Government. As he opened the letter, it was his call-up papers. Oh no, I've got no gripe with the Germans. I haven't even seen a German. I don't want to join the army. I've just got married. He had no option. He was conscripted. He was sent to Rose Grove Barracks in Burnley to do his training, and there he was taught how to clean a Lee Enfield rifle, how to bull his boots, and how to iron his kit. He then had 7 days leave with his beloved wife, Annie. Every second, every minute, every hour, every day of those 7 days meant so much to this young boy, because he realised he was not going to see his 19th birthday. He passionately hugged and kissed young Annie for the very, very last time at the railway station in Clitheroe, and as the train pulled out of the station, he must have looked for the window and seen her disappear in the smoke and steam. And the only thing that must have helped him that day was the fact that nearly every man on that train was going through exactly the same situation. His battalion, the 11th Service East Lancashires, arrived at the Somme battlefield on the 1st of July 1916. None of them had any idea that this was going to be the blackest day in the history of the British Armed Forces. They made their way up to the communication lines, and on their left they had the York and Lancasters, on the right they had the Leicestershire Regiment, and right down a line of 25 miles were 90,000 other British soldiers just waiting for the off on what we now know as the Battle of the Somme. At exactly 7:30, 1st of July 1916, the whistles blew and these young boys made their way over the top. Within 3 minutes of leaving the trench, John was killed instantly. His young wife in Clitheroe could feel something was not right. She just knew something was not right. For 7 days, that poor girl could not drink, she could not eat, she could not sleep. She knew there was something very wrong. And she waited for the postman to arrive. On the 8th day, a letter arrived. And as the letter hit the doormat, she saw her name on the letter. She had no idea, but only 8 days previously, as her husband had made his way to the actual lip of the trench, the sergeant major said, "Right, lads, just very quickly, could you all write a letter to your loved ones?" Johnny wrote a quick letter to young Annie, placed the letter in an envelope, and the sergeant major took each letter from each man and withdrew his bayonet and skewered the letters. He placed the bayonet tip in the sandbag at the top of the trench, and then the whistles blew. John lost his life 3 minutes later. The letter arrived at number 21 Wilson Street, Clitheroe, and as the letter hit the doormat, young Annie came rushing in to grab the letter. She saw her name in it. A strange tear in the corner where the sergeant major's bayonet had pierced the letter. She opened the letter, and the only reason the story has continued is I met Annie's granddaughter, because in those 7 days' leave, Annie conceived. I was shown the letter by Annie's granddaughter. As I looked at the words, a lump appeared in my throat. The words were quite beautiful. "Dear Annie, you are the love of my life. I worship the very ground you walk on, my dear, and I swear to you, if I cannot come back to you in the form of a human being, I will come back to you in the form of a ghost and say goodbye to you in the corner of the Norman Keep, Clitheroe Castle, where we played as children." As I read the letter, I was overcome with emotion. It was a great honour to read something so personal, so private, and a real family heirloom from the Hesketh family. And a lot of the words had become very, very badly smudged. And Annie's granddaughter informed me that when her grandmother read the letter, she too, of course, was deeply choked by the material. The last question I asked, and it was a very, very diplomatic one, was, "Did your grandmother go to the Norman Keep?" "Oh, she did," she said. "Oh, she did. At first, she couldn't see him, but she could smell him. And apparently as human beings, we all have a different scent, a different aroma." All of a sudden, he appeared with a golden glowing smile on his face, and she tried to grab him, but each time she grabbed him, her hands went straight through him. He then turned, smiled, waved, and made his way to the next world. Annie was 18, with child. She never ever remarried. She died in 1977, and it's said all she had on her lips was the name of young John Hesketh, whose only crime in life was to be born at the wrong time of the last century. A very touching story.
Yeah,
David.
it is. And I think you hit the nail on the head about so many young wasted lives with these wars and things. And that, like you say, they have no arguments with Germany or any other country that they go and fight in. And it sort of brings it home, really, that I think people ought to think. I know everyone joins the army and the services to serve their country, but then they get mixed up in wars that they probably don't agree with, and I mean, I've never been in the services, but I was actually mixed up in doing government jobs for the US Air Force. At the time, I thought I was doing right, because I was working on weapons of mass destruction of some sort. But now I quite disagree with what I was working on, and I've got quite a different opinion now as to what I did then, you know. But
yes, of course,
but,
yeah.
well, yeah, it's just one of those things anyway. I'm going to talk about me anyway. But in your own particular field, do you actually go on any ghost hunts or investigations or anything?
Yes, I do, David. I'm not actually a psychic. I'm not a medium. I'm not a clairvoyant. But this weekend, I have been booked by a group from Nottingham. Nottingham seems to be the headquarters of the
There
paranormal
seems to be a
world.
lot going on that way. Yeah.
It's a thing called Dusk Till Dawn, and they will hire me. What
I've heard of
actually
that
happens,
group. Yeah, good.
I will meet them on Saturday morning by minibus and take about, say, 25, 30 people, and we'll go on to what's called Pendle Hill.
Yeah.
Pendle Hill, of course, is very, very famous for the 1612 Pendle
The
witch trials,
yeah.
where some 12 local people were taken from the Pendle Hill region and executed in the city of
Yeah,
Lancaster.
quite horrific stories, actually, when you read about those.
They are very, very, very touching, very sad stories, really. And what I tend to do is, with the minibus, is we go to each location associated with the Pendle Witches. And we go to Lancaster City Castle as well, of course, to the dungeons there. And then at night time, we make our way to what would have been the Forest of Pendle and a place called Malkin Tower, which was the home of the Demdike and Devise families. And we will stand on the very, very soil that they lived in all those years ago. And that's when the Dusk Till Dawn or the haunted happenings or the spooktacular people, they will actually hire me just to tell the story. Then their mediums take over. What has happened once or twice on Pendle Hill, and I really can't get my head around it, David, is we've been there in, shall I say, January and December when it's totally freezing conditions, and yet this gorgeous aroma will come from nowhere. And it's almost like walking into a flower shop.
I've experienced that. It's weird, isn't it? Yeah.
It is most unusual. It's a beautiful, gorgeous, sweet aroma. And at first I thought was one of these mediums got an aerosol, but they really do take their jobs very seriously.
They do, yeah.
And I can't give you, or indeed the listeners, a logical answer to that at all. I really can't.
Mean, you know as well as I do. You tend to find out who the frauds are and who the real ones are. Just by knowing them eventually, don't you? It's
yes.
I'm sure you know a few frauds the same as I do.
I'm sure it does happen, David. Yeah, I'm sure it does. Really. I think people do exploit that side sometimes.
Unfortunately,
really.
I think you're right. It's I think people just get so wound up in it. I think they just want to make the name for themselves in the end. And
I think that's the case, David. Yes, I agree.
But anyway, you've got, as I say, you've got a show on this network. What is your show called, Simon? I mean, I know what it is, but tell everyone else out there.
They're called Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected. Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected. I have written a book, volume 1, on that theme, and I'm halfway through my second book. But what is really nice is using some of that material on the show, and I will be using that for the next one coming up this month, of course.
Yeah, excellent. That sounds good. But I will put a link on my Paranormal Dimensions page for to your show and everything, and hopefully for your book if you've got a picture. Is it available on Amazon, I presume?
Yes, it is indeed, David.
Right.
Yes, you can get it on Amazon and indeed Kindle as well if you want to.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do. I'll put that on my page and everything.
Thanks.
Anyway, how do you see your future in this? Do you think you'll carry on and as far as for as long as you can? Or
it's really funny, David. I think I've been very, very fortunate. I mean, I used to work for the local authority, a very, very safe job with sick pay and pension. And when I paid my mortgage off, I thought, there's a lot more to life than working for the local authority. And I took a leap of faith. And what actually happened was quite amazing. I've had today off, but I've been busy every single day this week, mainly with coach tours relating to Pendle Witches, relating to...
Yeah, I saw I saw a picture. You were on one just the other day, weren't you?
That's what I had.
When the show goes out, it'll be a couple of weeks ago, but
yes.
Yeah, I'll put a couple of pictures on that from that if you don't mind. It's
of course, David. Thank you very much indeed.
Right. It's a pleasure. I mean, hopefully I'll get up your way. Maybe I'll get to meet you again. And
It would be an honour. Thank you.
I'd like to go on one of your tours if I get a chance.
You'll be very welcome, David.
Certainly will.
And of course the listeners as well. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I'll put some links and things on to anything that. And if you've got any interesting things that are going on with you, send me some links and things, and I'll put them on the page.
Very good.
You probably know a few of our other. We've got a few shows that are coming up on this network, haven't we? They seem to be coming along. Everyone wants to get on this network now, as I understand.
Very successful.
It is, yeah.
What I do find amazing, and as you quite rightly said, you were talking to a lady from Queensland, Australia,
Yes.
a gentleman from Phoenix, Arizona, and it's definitely a worldwide
We've
interest.
certainly got listeners all over the world, and
Yes.
I keep saying to others, it just amazes me. I mean, at the beginning of this year, I had no inkling or idea of even having a show of my own. You know, it's just weird the way it's happened, really. But
Well, you're the right man for the job,
well,
David.
I don't know about that, but I'm doing my best. I mean, my nerves are not quite as bad as they were when I first started out on it, but you know.
Well, I find a few pints of real ale really helps.
Or a cup of coffee in front of me helps. But yeah, I mean, I will carry on as long as they'll keep me on and keep me here.
Yeah,
but
of
if they
course,
give me the boot at some point, then that'll be it, I suppose. But no, I'm enjoying it. It's good. I mean, I'm meeting so many speaking to so many lovely people. You know, I mean, I do meet them in person as well, and. As I say, it's really opened a whole new world to me, really, and it's fantastic. And you must meet some lovely people as well. I'm sure you meet a few rotten ones as well, but yeah, I mean, your stories fascinate me, and you're such a good storyteller. I mean, this is why one of the reasons I had to have you on the show, because you're fantastic. I like all the sound effects and everything as well you can do.
Well, I do use the sound effects sometimes. When I'm on the coaches, they have a microphone, and things like I do stories on the great Richard Palmer, who of course was Dick Turpin, and the sound of Black Bess, which goes a bit like a.
Excellent. That's amazing.
And things like ghostly train sounds.
That is fantastic.
It's a lovely sound,
Yeah,
isn't
it is
it? Really?
brilliant.
I mean, radio's a great day for these because it's all to do with audio, not with radio and stories. They go together.
Yeah, it's a bit like going back to the 50s, isn't it? Before there was TV and everything,
Yes.
and you'd lay in bed listening to the radio show, and everything's. And like the old comics and reading books and things, it's all in your head. Your imagination comes to life.
That's right, Dave.
I think that's very important. I think there's a lot of that's getting lost on the present generation as well, with all the computer games and video games and films and God knows what else. You know, I think imagination is being lost on a lot of them. But
Yeah. So through shows like yours, Dave, it's
well,
coming
and
back.
yours,
you see.
Simon, and others, and hopefully,
It's coming back again.
I mean, hopefully we can draw more people in. It'll be good.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm afraid
Yes,
I suppose we're going to have to wind it up there. And I'll thank you so much, Simon. It's been brilliant.
My pleasure, David.
And,
It's been lovely talking.
Anyway, listeners out there, you've been listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and you've just been listening to Simon Entwhistle, a fantastic guest, and I hope maybe we'll have him on again at some point. I'm David Young, and this is Paranormal Dimensions, and goodbye. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, David.
Bye-bye.